Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress. This is a monthly Q&A hosted on the Bay 12 forums, talking about everything Dwarf Fortress. If you would like to take part in these discussions, follow the link to the threads in the description of this video. It's been a busy month for Dwarf Fortress. Version 53.15 has released, and it included a pack of 100 new animals. This is the first time Dwarf Fortress has added animals in over a decade, so it's kind of a big deal. Alongside of the looming 20th anniversary of Dwarf Fortress coming up early next month, and the slow drip feed of information of the Magic update coming later this year. Before we dive into the questions proper, we're going to read the Bay 12 Games report. Toady writes, "The extinct creatures have been released. That seems to have gone mostly well, aside from some odd issues with syndromes in old saves, and the biteless Tyrannosaurus people, and such. Overall, I'm glad people like the critters. I've started in on magic effects and rituals, as I mentioned last time. The links between procedural, Lua text, and raw knowledge skills, and research methods and activities, professions, and such have come together. I have a little debug wizard casting spells based on knowledge alone, rather than syndromes or primordial items. There is a magical projectile effect that can trigger an additional interaction on impact, so we can expand beyond the era of magic dusts and such, to handle spell-like effects. Magical projectiles have their own layered palletized animations, and their impact effects do as well. This includes special palettes for divine metals and fabrics, which can also be used for sphere-linked colorization generally. This month, we'll see continued work in this direction. We no longer do the big multi-year releases, and we were going to do an especially long one for Magic before Steam, as many of you know. So there's more picking and choosing about what this first Magic release is going to mean. We're focusing on Fortress Wizards, of course, and temples and attacks, and a bit with the underground and ruins. The next big thing to do is expand the new activity definitions to encompass multi-stage rituals for multiple participants, to be conducted in temples or around magical work areas. Code-wise, these have the most in common with tavern dances. We're already using smaller single-move versions of these for spell casting that don't create actual in-game activities. And while that ends the update on the status of Magic from Tarn, he also notes that they sold 10,000 copies in June, mostly due to the Kitfox Publisher sale and the Steam Summer Sale. Thank you very much for the update, Tarn. And with that, let's dive into the Future of the Fortress Q&A. The first question comes in from Wooks, and they write, "I was wondering, especially with the addition of new, very large creatures, if you have any thoughts on expanding mounts into adventure mode, and particularly fortress mode. I'm also curious if you've got any direction you want to go with tactics at a fortress level. I often dream of doing my own ambushes, or more historical strategies like Roman phalanx formations, maybe tied to leadership or tactician skills, on the part of various military nobles. I know people love what we can already achieve already with careful engineering. And briefly, a side tangent about time travel, have you considered using some rollback save system to let players shift from managing their fortress to engaging directly with the various missions we can send dwarves on? I can understand the history recollection being quite hard there for many reasons, so failing that, maybe some option to release the fortress for a short time, somewhat like retiring it briefly, to instead assume control of a squad or army on a mission, in some mode closer to adventure mode, where large areas of the world can be traversed." And Tarn's response to that multi-paragraph of a question is as follows. "There are mounts in adventure mode, at least the ones you can start with or steal from the fields. There are things to be done there as usual. Fortress mode mounts for dwarves are not in the plans, as we support more critters living in forts. As with the recent caravan changes, it does appear on the horizon that you might supply mounts for them. We don't have any timelines for that. We had plans for formations long ago, and for the army's stuff off-site to have more positional information, and that's still the general idea. There are way fewer creatures in the play area than in real-world engagements, so many formation ideas start to fall apart, I think. But you should still be able to have people stand how you like, etc. We are planning at some point to get an active second area loaded and running. It is a question of whether the fort should be left running, or whether there should be a frozen time, whether through saves or otherwise, or brief retirement. All have been considered, and all have pretty huge problems. I don't know at this point which one we will attempt first. Just switching to adventure mode would be the easiest, but only a subset of people are going to be interested in that at all. And it would be nice to have some view of the fights while keeping your fortress going. The next question comes in from Lawnmower Man. They say, could we have more realistic needs for domesticated animals, like food for every animal? Why don't pigs, dogs, and poultry need it at all, such as sleep or warmth? In the current state, it's too easy to breed such animals. Meanwhile, hunting is more complex. Animal breeding and fishing currently makes hunting essentially pointless. The reward for effort is inadequate. It would be great to at least share food, as we share bolts with wild animals. And Tarn's response is, it's odd that there is only grazing for certain creatures and no other eating types. Yeah, I have no idea when we'd take a look at something like this. It does feel like we might need similar food portions, which could get messy very fast. Although, there are a variety of ways to handle that. The next question comes in from Frank Ville, and they ask, imagine a world without magic, where gods don't exist, but dwarves blindly believe in the mythology that defines their religion. The gods, sacred objects, and legends. Could myths influence dwarf behavior? I'm thinking about something as mundane as superstitions. For example, they might get nervous if they see a torn sock, because they remember the myth of the demon and the cursed sock, or things like that. And Tarn's response is, the settings for myth and magic were always going to have a no fantasy setting, in which case, none of the things would be real, including dwarves, without further parameter tweaking. And there's been various talk over the years of using the myth generator to produce religions that are incorrect, but still believed. But now that everything is cut up into smaller releases, we need the myth generator at all first. But we hope to use it for unfounded beliefs, yes. A question comes in from Zazotak, and they say, will creature tags play a role in availability to use magic? I would love to see what happens to a civ that replicates the brutal caste system of Jürgeschmidt, where commoners are like insects beneath the overwhelming power of magic users. Though I'm not sure how much luck I'd have in other departments. Like, I can't see a way to make it so that magic using castes can only reproduce with magic using castes, or a way to make ethics apply differently depending on caste. Perhaps it is for the best that Jürgeschmidt is not recreated. And Tarn's response is, there was a related possible outcome of the prototype myth generator. But yeah, it'd be a series of tasks to get various cultural impacts properly respected, since there are all sorts of CPU saving shortcuts taken in world gen, etc. In practice, things will come online in pieces, and the easier pieces will come first, such as magic is a thing that can be learned, or every creature of this type is innately magical in some way. Even in those easier cases, there should be a vast cultural reckoning, and that all has to come online in pieces as well. We'll start seeing that with our little resident wizard groups, and so forth. A question comes in from a Spatula66, and they ask, speaking of the night creature token, it seems like kind of a loaded token. It does not have miscellaneous stuff, and we only have an idea of what its effects are because of Putnam looking at the code for it. Do you think that its effects might get split up in the future? One thing I've noticed it does, which can be a bit strange, is that killing a creature with a night creature gives you hero representation, and this continues to apply if the night creature has joined a civilization. So, if there's, for example, an experiment peasants in a town, you can kill them, and the others will think that you're a hero, and also a murderer sometimes. I presume this isn't the intention, and Tarn's response is, the tag is overloaded. Experiments especially are a weird example that haven't been fully realized. A question comes in from Slow Person, and they ask, what plans exist for linking magic to the justice system? This probably won't make it into the initial magic release since it's not combat related, but having a magical solution to uncovering plots via divination seems kind of a given. Worth at least asking what is being anticipated. And Tarn's response is, there aren't any concrete plans regarding magic versus justice, or economy, etc. But as with most spell effects, there are just a ton of applications that we'll have to bring in as systematically and comprehensively as we can over a long time. Once there is divining or mind reading, what have you, there will be a lot to look at. A question comes in from Captain Tofu, and they ask, so far dwarves and workshops barely need any tools. Smoothing rocks, cleaning, shaping metals, all done with raw dwarven hands. The few exceptions are chopping trees, which requires an axe, and a mining pick. Do you intend to keep this simple, or go into details here, like needing chisels and their quality and material mattering for engraving, or building as a stoneworker, and knives for butchers, clothers, and hospitals, and so on? A compromise could be to speed up the job significantly, like hauling with wheelbarrows. You don't need them them, but they are a significant upgrade. And Tarns' response is, yeah, I think having individual tools is theoretically cool, but ends up making fort mode way too fiddly to use. We've been thinking about adding more tools to workshops, kind of in the vein of that whole zones, not shops thing. But even if shops remain, the tools could be added to them to improve them. The downside of this is that all being localized to one shop. But since the same dwarf will probably mostly work at one shop, it's probably not that huge of a downside. This can tie into apprenticeships at the shop and other shop customization. The next question from Captain Tofu. The embark skill points for dwarves are limited to 10. There are roughly 4 categories of skills: labor, combat, social, physical, and even with all 10 points being used, you end up with unreasonably unskilled dwarves. You'd think that after traveling for months, you'd at least have novice knowledge of geography and animal caretaking. Will embark party mechanics change in the future, like picking out of a list of existing civilization site entities and then enhancing them with 10 points, or having a point budget for each category? And Tarn's response is, it's all a bit weird. Dwarves become legendary very quickly once they've settled at the site. In that case, they should all be legendary before they arrive, if they are over 20 years old. There's a lot to rebalance about it, but yeah, the starting 7 are particularly ill-formed, skillless mystery dwarves. The next question is also from Captain Tofu. The world map is clustered with points of interest. Do you have plans to add more user-friendly features to it, like a zoom function, nicknaming sites, or leaving notes? Or is the world map something the fortress mode is not meant to be focused on? And Tarn's response is, it's going to become more and more central. I think we'll start getting some of those things as more features come in. And here we have another question from Captain Tofu, who asks, the skill levels range from dabbling to legendary for civil skills, legendary +5 invisible levels, after which additional levels don't influence the mathematics. And for combat skills, there's no ceiling. Dwarf Fortress is mostly grounded in realism, and this is a legacy aspect from at least a decade ago. Is this set in stone or subject to revision? And Tarn's response is, everything is subject to revision. In some future, the skills would be more subject to knowledge gates, and have various stylistic divergencies. I don't know very much about a lot of things, so it's slow and difficult to meaningfully expand. But it's simple and weird the way it is now. And a question from Angle of the Sun, and they ask, for the new era mode magical civilizations, what species will occupy them? Will it be like the existing races, like dwarves, elves, or animal people, or procedurally generated creatures? And Tarn's response is, we don't have time to draw up all new procedural humanoids for this release, so they'll be drawn from the existing lists. And a question comes in from Eric Blank, and they write, it's probably been asked before, but in the future, will animal people have mythical explanations or dependencies for their existence? For instance, will particular species only exist if there was an event that created them, or created all species simultaneously? Relatedly, how will the game decide which populations to create myths about? Will it always be related to membership to a civ, or some aspect of the creature? And Tarn's response is, the prototype myth generator grouped animal people into one category, and had a specific explanation for their existence, as it did for each of the civilization creatures. I think in the future we might see certain worlds where only certain animal people exist, and are perhaps renamed in that case, and other worlds where the full set exists. We generally want myths to explain all the civilization creatures at least, for other animals, etc. It's fine if they are just part of the world, or if they get a specific callouts or involvement, etc. A question comes in from Ulm, and they write, once you guys have sold 10 bazillion copies and are sustainably rich, do y'all plan on pulling a Lord British and building a Dwarf Fortress themed mansion? What would be in it? What odd exploits of the game mechanics would make it into the design? Any vampire-powered features? Would there be a tavern for fans to visit? Minecarts that could dump your visitors into lakes so their swim skill goes up? And Tarn's response to this tongue-in-cheek question is, we have 2 cats. That's a great place to live. A quantum stockpile would be handy though. And a question comes in from the Plump Helmet Man, and they write, what does extinct mean in the context of prehistoric animal world gen settings? Does this mean that they'll just be functionally non-existent in the world, like griffins, chimeras, and centaurs? Or will dwarves actually be able to dig up their fossils in fort mode? And Tarn's response is, they are just non-existent. And a question comes in from Juice the Gar, or Juice Theger. I'm actually not sure how you say this one. It's been tripping me up for a few months now. The dinosaur update raises an interesting question about the origins of life in Dwarf Fortress. Do you envision the world's species as primarily evolving from common ancestors, like magically, divinely created, or a mixture of both? For example, dwarves, humans, elves, and goblins, and other sentient races like troglodytes and trolls, evolutionarily related? And could we eventually see ancestral or transitional humanoid species in the world generation? evolution? Or are some races fundamentally separate creation? And Tarn quotes a chunky response from Volleylol, so we'll read that first. The nature of the species' origins seems like it'd be very much up to the myth generator. I'm not sure what amount of variance we're getting in this first push, but the humans emerged from the animals, and the giant Thobon shed tears forming the humans. These make sense as possible inclusions, because origins like this occur in real-life myths. As for relations between sentient creatures, one of the MythGen demos had the goblins created as being cursed dwarves. Also, Tolkien does this with elves and orcs, so it feels like an obvious inclusion. Maybe if you combine that with an intermediate creature, you could have something like evolutionary relations. The troglodytes emerged from the animals, and the dwarves emerged from the troglodytes. The humans emerged from the troglodytes, etc. Not sure if Dwarf Fortress will ever have Homo erectus by name. It doesn't come off as a very fantasy-ish inclusion to me, but also have read a limited experience reading it. Maybe it's all the roar to have Homo habilis in some genre, and if it is, and the Brothers Adams deems it fits, maybe we'll see them then. And Tarn's response is, the myth generator ultimately has control of this, and in a world without correct myths, that implies accounting for evolution, etc. It's fiddling generating additional humanoids, especially with the graphics now, but we'll eventually need better and better humanoid generators, so it might become a fair thing to handle. So this next one is going to need a little bit of preparation, because it's referring to a Reddit thread. The question comes in from Mikos, and they say, this Reddit thread recently raised the issue that biomes are limited to 7 creatures of each of the 5 types: large roaming, large predator, vermin, vermin soil colony. The main concern is that with the additional creatures added, the pool of animals would be further diluted. Could you shed some light on why 7 was chosen, and if there's any intention to alter that amount in the future, or make it possible for modders to change it? And Tarn's response is, I'm open to changing things, but a given specific forest having only a subset of the animals that could possibly live there seems reasonable to me. It's how the real world works. There's a part at the end of the algorithm that makes sure that every creature is placed in some part of the world as well, as I recall. Though, of course, some of those will be geographically isolated. It reminds me of the ubiquitous ores setting. Eventually, we changed it so that the default is finding all the metals everywhere, but it also makes every place the same, which also annoyed people. I think since forts are played for a long while, and since there aren't a ton of outside interactions yet, it makes sense that people would want their fort to have most animals and resources. But this is also something that would have to be revised as the world gets more connected for trade to be meaningful. So if I change this default, I'd likely just end up changing it back to something similar. There's also a technical issue with the sheer number of regions and animal populations on larger maps, but there's probably enough flexibility there even if the numbers are modified upwards somewhat. And at some point, we'd have to loosen the links of animal populations from specific regions though, which would cause other problems. I do want to add a little note onto the end of this one and just say that I think the issue is certain types of creatures are incredibly common, and some of these creatures can become quite annoying. While it is amusing to get normal-sized Kias coming in to try and steal your anvil early game, if all you're seeing for an entire fortress is giant magpies and giant buzzards and giant ravens, it gets a little samey. It would be nice to see a Sasquatch once in a while, or have a few other creatures that could show up, even if it was just seasonally. Because if all you're seeing is one thing, I think everything feeling exactly the same as it did 20 minutes ago is pretty boring. I don't consider this to be similar to the amount of minerals in a map, because it is much more feasible to import materials or import goblins to import the materials for you. Whereas with animals, you're kind of just out of luck of the draw. You most likely can't purchase any more new interesting animals from your own faction, so you're left up to trading, guessing what creatures they have. But if you're trying to get a large grizzly bear, that's going to be almost impossible. I think creature collecting could be something that could be very valuable to Dwarf Fortress, and while I wouldn't want elephants to show up in an Arctic biome, it would be cool to see more than just polar bears and penguins. The next question comes in from Zazzy, and they ask, since it's been on my mind lately, and I have heard that it may be added in the Myth and Magic, are there plans, or I guess, are there still plans for adding transgender dwarves? And if so, what are they? What would the potential causes for a transgender awakening be? Will gender-affirming care come from a fort's doctors, wizards, or would they be working together? Would an awakening or transition be able to happen in fort mode? Or would it only be able to happen off-screen during World Gen? And Tarn's response is, we're not going to get to anything beyond the bare minimum for Myth and Magic, so gender is no longer related to that. The general plans here fluctuate since there are very few gender norms and concepts in the game. game, and we don't have plans to add anything there. So it's basically a question of whether changing pronouns in combat reports is good enough for the overall subject, which doesn't feel correct. I'm not sure what a good pathway forward is. Question comes in from The Marmot, and they ask, regarding the magic artifacts, what was the reasoning on giving primordial fire artifacts the ability to cause blisters instead of the fireball ability used by Mega Beasts? And are there any plans to change the current abilities of various primordial remnants, weapons, and jewelry? And Tarns' response is, the primordial remnants were really rushed, so this should all be reworked. And another question from The Marmot, and they write, will some of the abilities of primordial remnants affect the world and fortress in other ways? Destroying a primordial cloud stuff associated with storms causes storms and hurricanes around a region, or a primordial plant planted on a field giving better yields for various crops, etc. And Tarns' response is, the resident wizards in fort mode will give you several new abilities the first release and more over time. And this process will often involve delving into mysteries of creation. That will encompass more than the primordial remnants, but includes them. Another question from The Marmot, and they write, once all the pre-Steam features from Legends mode are back, do you plan on adding more features to it? Both quality of life features and or new categories? And Tarns' response is, yeah, it's an ongoing game mode like the others. And another of the many questions from The Marmot. It's a busy Marmot. Worth a shot at this, seeing that many cities and hamlets have populations that reach over 300 people. How do you plan on making player outposts being able to withstand more citizens? And Tarns' response is, human cities, etc. can get up to 10,000, so we can't use populations of other sites as a benchmark. More frame rate is always good, but fortresses larger than 200 aren't really the focus. It's a lot of people already to have any meaningful connection with. But in an ideal universe, yeah, we'd support a lot more as an option. And another question from The Marmot, why are world generation fortresses generated with few embark tiles compared to the default 4x4 player fortresses? Could world generated sites expand their initial embark size as time passes once you tackle site generation? And Tarns' response is, are they 3x3 or 1x1? I don't recall. I think I just wanted them to be symmetric around the center. There was no strong reason for it, especially because cities and hillocks get up to 17x17. I think site expansion is more likely to be through auxiliary work sites at first, expanding the civilized sprawl without being 100% tied to the notion of rectangular site boundaries. And a final question from The Marmot, at least in this package, and they write, speaking of expanding sites, would it be possible for player settlements to expand beyond their initial embark size? And Tarns' response is, the problem is all frame rate. Doing the map expansion itself would be straightforward, since it already does this in adventure mode, just to move around. I don't want to make the expansion of the site rectangle to be a fundamental mechanic without the frame rate to back it up. And a question comes in from Enemy Post. I'm excited for the dinosaurs. I'm sure I'll be playing with them by the time of the Future of the Fortress reply. I'm curious, from a creative standpoint, what led to the decision to add them? I figure they've always had a little presence through some of the Titans and Forgotten Beasts, but I don't know if they were always planned. And Tarns' response is, we've been wanting to add them for many years, since at least the time of the original sponsorship drive in the late 2000s. As you know from the Gibbon list, Bay 12 likes the animal world and various creatures of the world, and it's cool to have more of them, and different sorts. And being a computer game lets us add things that would otherwise be impossible, which is also cool. And a question from DPH Kraken, and they say, I just want to say thank you for the layer set templates for the sleeper feature of animal people sprite graphics. It looks like they're all raw defined and look like a super extensible framework for outfitting creature graphics in far less verbose manner. May I ask what your roadmap is with layer set templates, since layer graphics have been a constant extensibility headache? And Tarns' response is, we added them to solve the particular problem, so we haven't hashed out all of the various extensions that can be added to them. Most of the graphical stuff doesn't have the same set of extensive notes other features have, since graphics are something we weren't thinking about until recent. We're happy to add more stuff to them, of course, and I imagine we will as problems need to be solved. Another question from a Spatula66, and they say, I notice most or all of the new animal people are missing attacks that you'd reasonably expect them to have. They only have punch and kick attacks, and are lacking the ability to bite and gore people with their tusks, claw, slap with their tails, etc. Is this intentional? It seems like a mistake. mistake. Also, it seems a lot of the new animals reach adulthood at age 1, and full size at age 2, which is probably not accurate. Many of the dinosaurs are known to have taken significantly longer to mature in real life. Is this subject to change in the future? And Tarns' response is, yeah, that was an oversight. I simply forgot that animal-person conversion removed all attacks. It has been a long time since I've made one. I can change anything we have the data for, or anything that should reasonably be changed. The next question comes in from a Plump Helmet Man, and they write, seeing as it's the first non-proc-gen creature release we've had in well over a decade, correct me if I'm wrong, the Dino update has me pondering whether we're likely to see more fantasy or mythological creatures added to the vanilla raws at this point, such as centaurs, chimeras, and griffins. Of course have placeholder files, and can show up in engravings, but beyond their potential implementation, there's also such classic creatures as basilisks, ents, treants, gorgons, hippogriffs, manticores, pasegi, wyverns, and the list goes on. And Tarn's response is, I think that it'll be a mix of procedural stuff, but also just fun non-proc generation things from time to time, as we get more of the magical effects in. The standard fantasy and myth creatures can start to have some of their traditionally associated powers we didn't have before as well. People are right that the centaur problem comes up, but for many creatures it doesn't, and we also just need to handle that at some point, and then we can have centaurs. A question comes in from Drackley, and they say, a couple of things in Dwarf Fortress games happened recently that got me thinking about how predatory animals work in Dwarf Fortress. One that I was reading through Legends mode about is how a Tyrannosaurus devoured a turkey and a water buffalo belonging to a civ, and the word devoured stuck in my mind. Devoured tells me that they ate the turkey and buffalo, but I don't think I've ever seen an animal eating a kill in Dwarf Fortress. Is this something new, or something I somehow missed that already happens? And if it doesn't exist, has there been any thoughts about that behavior of predatory animals, like large predators in Dwarf Fortress, like maybe reducing an animal corpse to bones, or carrying it away? And Tarn's response is, it's something that happens in World Gen, and we've thought about adding it at various times. It's quite possible. The elves will do it first, and that'll be a grisly day. The next question is from Stained Class, and they ask, you said the first new types of magic are going to be a magical barrier making a magical temporary wall, and wall destroying power. How is the magical barrier maker going to use it in Fortress mode? Will it be intelligent enough to precisely cover breaches in fortifications? And Tarn's response is, those are the first new types of magic as it turns out, since we have some stuff in now, such as magic projectiles, which isn't those things, but we'd still like to do that with barriers. I think the barrier maker AI is going to be less important for now than player-guided rituals. The dwarves don't understand themselves where their walls should be at all, and I don't think I can attempt that now, though there might be some easy exceptions. The next question from Stained Class is as follows. Beyond the simple magic powers, are new secrets other than necromancy going to be introduced by the magic updates? Do you think about some in particular? Will secret learners be immortal or not? Will they be as hostile as necromancers? Friendly? Neutral? Will their intelligence vary from individual to individual? How will these new secret bearers be considered and treated by mundane people in civilizations? And Tarn's response is, new additions work quite differently from necromancy, and don't cause permanent changes as the default. It is knowledge, but not the forbidden changes you completely type of knowledge. How they are treated by civilizations will have to wait until we formalize the groups of wizards that will have individuals visit and live in your fortress. We haven't addressed any cultural stuff yet. The next question comes from Dick Butt DeGreat, and they say, August 5th, are you still planning on releasing the source code for the OG version sometime during the event? You mentioned something about this back in February of 25. If you ever found the backups on your old hard drives, you'd be fine with releasing the sauce for the old original build for us to compile and mess with. I'm still very much interested in that offer. Now, before I read Tarn's response, I do want to note that there's been a lot of discussion about releasing parts of Dwarf Fortress's source code by Tarn and also the community, and every time this gets ballooned into way bigger proportions than Tarn has talked about, as Tarn clarifies here. The whole thing? I don't remember this at all. Regarding a complete version, it seems like it would get me into a world of pain in terms of confusingly named public forks versus bug tracker confusion and other issues. I do remember mentioning more generally cleaning up and putting up the world generator at some point as something feasible, but I don't have a timeline for that. Plump Helmet Man has another question and says, is it likely that in the future we might see settings for extinct animals further refined so that they're individually customizable by era, so that, say, we could have Paleozoic and Mesozoic creatures be isolated while having Cenozoic creatures found in any wilderness? Also, were you at any point concerned when finalizing the species list for the dino update that some of the creatures made in that, particularly the Cenozoic area, weren't distinct enough from the existing giant animals such as the Megalania and the Titan boa versus the existing giant monitor lizard and giant anaconda and pythons, respectively? If so, is there anything you were able to do to make them more distinct from a gameplay standpoint to stand out? And Tarns' response to this final question is, you can see in the creature definitions that I included the broad era for each one. This was in the hopes that I'd be able to do for this release. That just happened. I remember saying in here that I thought I'd get to some biome customization, etc., where all we ended up with was a setting in the world gen parameters. There were a few reasons for that. I lost a few weeks from the dino update release due to circumstances, and I'm still hopeful that we'll end up getting not just the biome settings, but mod customization in the preload screen there at some point. At which point, dino stuff can just piggyback on the mod parameters. In regards to creatures being similar in sizes to other things that already existed, nah, a ton of our creatures are already very similar to each other. I'm happy to have them around, and I'm happy to make them more distinct over time if there's anything known about them. And with all that brings us to the end of this month's Future of the Fortress. I just want to say a real quick thank you to those of you who watch these, and to my editor for putting together all of the text on screen. I have a new project in the works which I've just started work on, so keep an eye out for that in the coming weeks. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.